Shalom Israel. It's your brother Marcus G back with yet another Truth for Thought. First and foremost, I must give all praises, honor, and glory to the Most High. I must give all praises, honor, and glory to the Most High. Secondly, the prayer list. I'll start it off again with King Ricky. King Ricky, as I said, starts the prayer list off again, praying for his continued safety and security as he undergoes what he is undergoing presently. Also, we have Queen Piper and Queen India. Israel, I pray that you keep these two queens wrapped in prayer. We still have the Ellis family. That will be King Charles Ellis Sr., Queen Sydney Ellis, and King Charles Ellis Jr. Of course, we got my beloved brother, King Kemar. Israel, I pray that you keep King Kemar in prayer. He is undergoing a medical situation currently. Queen Raya, my spiritual grandma, Queen Shay, my spiritual aunt, and her son, King Daniel. Queen Valerie and her family. And who is my spiritual mom. And Queen Paula, my other spiritual mom, and her family. Also Queen Crystal, King Josh, Queen Ashley, and Queen Brittany. My married couples, King Ben and Queen Cassandra. I know I hadn't heard from you all in a minute. Just in case you all come up on this particular Truth for Thought, I am keeping you in prayer. King Jermaine and Queen Kenya. Israel, I ask that you continue to keep King Jermaine and Queen Kenya in prayer. Coming into a little bit of a trying time yet again. However, it appears that the Most High is all over it. So if you would keep King Jermaine and Queen Kenya in prayer, King Greg and Queen Sharon, my beloved King and Queen, my beloved brother and sister. I'm sorry, Queen Sharon, that I did not get back in contact with you yesterday. Had a very, very good Bible study with another couple that's I'm going to be mentioning here in the Truth for Thought. And also what the beginning of what that call started as is what next week's Truth for Thought is going to be about. I'm going to break down a particular chapter of Daniel. I'll just say that. That's the precursor for next Sabbath. I'm breaking down a chapter in Daniel. All right. Also, King Orbia and Queen Melinda, they are going through a trying time right now. Israel, I ask that you keep them wrapped in prayer. King Diamond and Queen LaShonda. Last time I talked with y'all, the truth had to be told. I recall I was there. Israel, definitely keep King Diamond and Queen LaShonda in prayer. Because it is my discernment that the Most High is moving on that behalf. Queen LaShonda and Queen Diamond, listen. It appears to me Yet that just might be happening. And last but not least, King Brian and Queen Shavonda. Remember I said I was in a dialogue with one of the couples that I'm gonna bring up in the prayer list. This is that couple. Definitely they study to show themselves approved. Every time they have a question, I hear from them a lot. Every week, pretty much. And they come and they try my spirit every time. I love it. Whether they actually have the understanding that they do, or that they actually do try my spirit or not, they come with questions, and the questions are getting more and more complex. They're covering some of the things that are found by many to be complex in the Bible, right? So I ask that you keep my beloved brother and sister in prayer. King Brian, I will be breaking it down next Sabbath, King. But seeing that I just mentioned, they call me about more and more complex things of the Bible. That's what we're speaking of today. It's just a perfect segue. We're speaking about the Bible. All right. The Holy Bible, right? If Israel, I could tell you with all certainty the exact amount of times I've heard such sayings as this, such ideologies as this. I don't know why y'all read that Bible. That Bible was written by the white man. You or listen to this. The Bible ain't real because if it was, why so many versions of it? I've heard all those things. I've heard all those things. I will address all those things. I will address all those things. Right. Now, to do so, and there's going to be scripture in this, but we got to examine, because those are things that are said by the world, right? So we have to examine this from the world, right? We're going to examine it from the world, because even the world proves who actually wrote the Bible. And it's not Esau. It's not any Edomite at all. In fact, the Bible was written by one biblical nationality. Out of all 18, only the one, right? We're going to find out what the whole Bible is. We're going to find out how each part, remember I'm saying part of the Bible, when each part was written, so that you'll have the definite timeline of succession for when each part was actually written. And the Bible is going to prove all of this. So yes, we will get some scripture. But we're going to start out with quite a bit from the world. So with that, in fact, I might just I'm gonna start out like this. We're gonna start out like this. I'm going to there's only two foundational statements for this particular truth for thought. So let me go ahead. And share my screen. As I mentioned one of these foundational scriptures a little earlier when I was talking about King Shavanda. I mean King Brian and Queen Shavanda, right? So I'm gonna share my screen, and we're gonna start by going to 1 Thessalonians 5:21. We're gonna start with that. We're gonna start with this. 1 Thessalonians 5:21. All things hold fast that which is good. Remember that. Because we're going to prove. This is about to be proven by the world and the word. All of this is about to be proven. Right? The next foundational scripture I want to go to is 2 Timothy 2:15. Right? Because all the people of Israelite descent that make such statements as the ones I made earlier, that's the white man's book, and that this, that, and the other, Had they just done a little studying, because I did some studying, and I'm going to share that studying with you. Had they just done a little studying, they would have understood differently than they do. So 2 Timothy 2:15, study to shew thyself approved unto God, unto the Most High, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. That whole scripture is key for today, right? So get your pens and paper ready. I'm gonna have all the links to everything that I'm going to examine. I'm gonna have all the links in the description. Have your pens and paper ready. All prior to us going to the word, right? Because again, I'm gonna had the people of Israelite descent that say such things, even today, they still say these things, right? Had they studied, had they researched, had they studied, they would have been able to rightly divide the truth. Had they proved that which they said, right, they would have been able to rightly divide the truth. All right. So let me stop sharing my screen here. And we're going to start, since I said we're going to look at the succession of how the actual Bible was written, right? Let's just start out by, because we got a bunch of questions to answer. We got questions like, who wrote the Bible, right? When were the parts of the Bible written, right? What make up the parts of the Bible? All these are questions that we have to answer. So let's start out with this. Let's start out with, it has traditionally been taught that the Bible consists of the New and Old Testament, correct? That was the tradition. Remember, I literally said, it is traditionally, it has been taught, traditional. That's a tradition made by man. So man has usually taught that the Bible consists of the Old Testament and the New Testament, right? Let's start out by looking at the Old Testament. So I'm going to share my screen again. And this time, we're going to be observing some facts, the truth about the Old Testament, all right? So, again, all the links, because I'm going to be doing a lot of I'm going to be looking at a lot of the world stuff, right? Because again, these are people of the world that say these things, right? They don't study because even the world says, even the world disproves that they say. And we finna see it, right? So this is talking about the Old Testament. The link will be in the description. Let's just read a little bit about this, right? The Old Testament, or OT, is the first division of the Christian biblical canon. Keep that in mind, because see, each part of the Bible was not called that till a certain time. The Old Testament was not referred to as the Old Testament until a certain time. Remember that. Remember that I'm telling you that. The Old Testament, or OT, is the first division of the Christian biblical canon. I will tell you, those are the people that named it the Old Testament. The Christians, right? Which is based primarily upon the 24 books of the Hebrew Bible, or Tanakh, a collection of ancient religious Hebrew and occasionally Aramaic writings by the Israelites. So I'm going to stop right here. I ain't even got far. In regards to the Old Testament, what you know as the Old Testament, it's based off of the Hebrew, written not by King James, by the Israelites. So I've not gotten far into this, and we see now who wrote the Old Testament. I'm going to go a little deeper into the Old Testament and the writings that comprise the Old Testament. Trust me. But I want the world to know, the same world, especially the ones that are in the world of Israelite descent. I want you to know who wrote the Old Testament. Not King James. Now, I want you to also keep King James, or the King James Version, or the New King James. I don't care what Bible it is, what version of the Bible it is, right? Keep those versions in mind. And I'm telling you that for a reason. All right. The second division of Christian Bibles, is the New Testament, written in Koine Greek language. Remember that. Remember that. See, the world trying to pull a little Shade over your eyes. I'm telling you, I'm going to prove it. But remember that this is what the same thing that just said the Old Testament was written by the Israelites. It was written in Hebrew, right? They turn around and say that the New Testament is written in Koine Greek. And they don't go any further, but I'm telling you, it breaks down further than that. All right, just keep that in mind. The Old Testament consists of many distinct books by various authors produced over a period of centuries. Christians traditionally, you can read about the tradition of man. Christians are types of men. They are men. And that's male and female collectively. So when Yahweh Shah refers to the tradition of man, it includes Christians. Let's just keep going. Christians traditionally divide, man traditionally divides the Old Testament into 4 sections. The first 5 books are Pentateuch, remember that, which corresponds to the Jewish Torah. The history books telling the history of the Israelites from their conquest of Canaan to their defeat and exile in Babylon. The poetic and wisdom books, this is the second division, dealing in various forms with questions of good and evil in the world, and the books of biblical prophets, warning of consequences of turning away from God. King Brian, when I do the breakdown of Daniel, I'm not going to say the chapter, that the book of Daniel is one of the books that Christians traditionally group as one of the books of biblical prophets, right? Because they put it in so many, three or four different categories, the Old Testament, right? The books that compose the Old Testament canon and their order and names differ between various branches of Christianity. Now, I'm not going to go too much further into that, right? Because I want to drop down and get something. I want to drop down and get something. I want to drop down and get this first, right? I want to drop down and get this. Look at this. Now, what this is proving is this. The Old Testament is based off of the Hebrew, and it does not matter what denomination of Christianity, it does not matter the version of the Bible. It's supposed to be based off of the Hebrew Bible. Now, to prove it, you see the columns here. You see the Hebrew Bible. You see the Old Testament as Protestants accept them. You see the Old Testament as the Catholics accept them. You see the Eastern Orthodox, how they accept them, right? But I want you to go all the way to that last box. Because, see, it don't matter which one of those, they all were written in Hebrew. It doesn't matter which one. Now, Right here, you see wisdom and you see Greek. You see prayer of Manasseh. You see Greek. Keep that in mind. I will be addressing that because are they're in a different portion of the Bible. But let's keep going. And you see nothing but Hebrew. Right? I want to go down here to composition. Now remember, you saw Hebrew and you saw Greek. 99% you saw Hebrew, 1% you saw Greek. But I'm going to address that because you're going to find out that's just scratching the surface. That's not telling the whole truth, which is just as good as a lie. The first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy, reached their present form in the Persian period. Write this down. 538 to 332 C. Right? So the Torah, right, reached their present form in that particular period of time, right? But they had already been written by the Hebrews, right? And their authors were the elite exilic returnees who controlled the temple at the time. The books of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings follow, forming a history of Israel from the conquest of Canaan to the siege of Jerusalem, 587 BC. So you're seeing the time frames in which these books of just the Old Testament were written. There is a broad consensus among scholars that these originated as a single work and the so-called Deuteronomistic history during the Babylonian exile of the 6th century. You see how time is constantly moving? Right. Let's keep going. The 2 books of Chronicles cover much the same material as the Pentateuch. You remember that word. And Deuteronistic history, and probably date from the 4th century. So we're dealing with 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th century, as the world is saying right now. BC. Chronicles and Ezra through Nehemiah was probably finished during the 3rd century BC. Catholic and Orthodox Old Testaments contain 2 Catholic Old Testaments to 4 Orthodox books of Maccabees. We're going to talk about, trust me, we're going to get into this because the book of Maccabees make up a part of the Apocrypha. But we're going to talk about that. Written in the 2nd and 1st century. So this is part of the Apocrypha written in the 2nd and 1st century. This is a key indicator that the Apocrypha was written after the Old Testament. But we're going to prove it. I know that that's the case, but we're going to prove it because a lot of people are under the misunderstanding that the Old Testament was written, then the New Testament was written by the Hebrews as they recorded it, and I say nay. The world is going to show nay. The Bible is going to say nay. That's not how it went. The Old Testament was written by the Hebrews. Then the Apocrypha, as you know it, was written by the Hebrews, and then the New Testament was written by the Hebrews. Now, before I really get too deep into it, we see here that the Hebrews wrote it, the Israelites wrote it in Hebrew, yet we read it today, the Old Testament, in English. Let's examine why. It all comes down to this one word: transliterate. What you read today in English is a transliteration of the Hebrew. Right? I'm going to prove it. I'm going to prove it. I'm not just saying this. First, the world already said it. For those that are of the world and still want to say, no. Your source says the Old Testament was written by the Israelites, the Hebrews, in Hebrew. Right? Let's look at the definition of transliterate, the verb to transliterate. It is to represent or spell in the characteristics of another alphabet, right? Instead of reading the Old Testament in the ancient Hebrew, it was transliterated letter for letter into the alphabet of English, word for word. So when you see that, and I'm going to go back to this, and I'm going to go back to this table. Let me go back to this. Look at this. When we go back to this, we look at this table. You see all that Hebrew. All that Hebrew, right? It was transliterated into English. Now, we also saw Greek. What you're going to find, I already know it, I've studied, is that Greek was transliterated from Hebrew. Now, before I get ahead of myself, we notice that the parts of the Apocrypha were written just after the Old Testament. So let's look at that. Let's look at that. They call them the Deuterocanonical books. Israel, I want you to pay very close attention. If you are of Israelite descent, I want you to pay very, very close attention. The Deuterocanonical books, from the Greek meaning belonging to the second canon, are the books and passages considered by the Catholic Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, and the Oriental Orthodox churches, and or the Assyrian Church of the East to be canonical books of the Old Testament, but which Protestant denominations regard it as the Apocrypha. All right. They date from 300 BC to 100 AD, right after the Old Testament. The Apocrypha was written after the Old Testament. The world is proving this, Israel, and the Bible's going to prove it too. Mostly from 200 BC to 70 AD, before the definite separation of the Christian church from Judaism, while the New Testament never directly quotes from or names these books, the apostles most frequently used and quoted the Septuagint. Keep that word. Write it down. Write it down right now. Write it down right now. Key word. Key word. The Septuagint. The Septuagint. We're going to get into the Septuagint. I just want to look at things as you know them today. You know them as the Old Testament. Now you're seeing how they were written, then the Apocrypha, and then we're going to look at the New Testament as the way they were truly written. All of these were written by Hebrews. Let's keep reading. Which includes them. Some say there is a correspondence of thought, and others see text from these books being paraphrased, referred or alluded to many times in the New Testament, depending in large measures of what is counted as a reference. Now, I want you to remember that statement right there. What they're basically saying is a lot of the stuff that's in the Apocrypha, that's also talked about later in the writings of the New Testament. That is a very true statement, and I'm going to prove that because the Bible proves that. The Bible proves that. When we get to the Bible, it'll all make sense. Although there is no scholarly consensus as to when the Hebrew, this is a Hebrew Bible canon, was fixed, some scholars hold that the Hebrew canon was established well before the 1st century AD, even as early as the 4th century BC, or by the Hasmonean dynasty. The Septuagint translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek. Remember when we looked at that first table and we saw Greek, and I told you there's more to that. That's not all the truth. The part that says Greek, well, that's mainly the New Testament. The New Testament was ushered in by Yahushua, and he walked during the Roman Greco times. And what the Greek did was transliterated what the Hebrews walking that time wrote. So even the New Testament. Well, we seeing that the Apocrypha, let's just stay with the Apocrypha. We see the Old Testament written by the Hebrews, Apocrypha written in Hebrew by Israelites. The Old Testament written in Hebrew by Israelites. The Apocrypha written in Hebrew by Israelites. So far, of the two parts of the Bible, they were not written by any white man. They weren't written by any of 17 biblical nationalities. They were only written by the one. And it's just one more part of the Bible that I want to look at, but I want to get a little bit more of this. The canon of modern rabbinic Judaism excludes the Deuterocanonical books. Albert J. Sundberg writes that Judaism did not execute from their scriptures, the Deuterochronicles, and the additional Greek text listed here. Now, that's saying man voted them out. Man voted these books right here out of the Bible. Tobit in the Apocrypha, Judith in the Apocrypha, Baruch, Apocrypha, Sirach, Apocrypha, First Maccabees, Second Maccabees, Wisdom of Solomon, additions to Esther, Prayer of Manasseh, First and Second Asher, Third and Fourth Maccabees as an appendice. Man voted all that out the Bible, right? Man voted all the times that these were written, the dates, screenshotted. Remember, the Old Testament was wrote between 6 to 300 BC. The Apocrypha, written from 300 BC to about 100 AD. As far as the sequence of time, the Old Testament was written, then the Apocrypha was written, because now we're finna go look at the New Testament. The link to all of this will be in the description. Let's go look at the New Testament. See if this time frame holds true. Let's see if who wrote these things holds true. Now, they kind of told off on the New Testament back when we were looking at the Apocrypha and said it was written by Hebrews, transliterated into Greek. Right? They kind of told off in the Apocrypha because they were talking as time was continuing to go on. Right? Let's just look at the New Testament. Let's just see. The New Testament, NT, is the second division. Notice they take the Apocrypha out because actually, chronologically, it should read the New Testament is the third division because it's all about leaving out the Apocrypha, which was written right after the Old Testament. But let's just keep reading because you finna see who voted it out. However, I'm going to show you that although the Christian church voted it out, the mother of the harem, the Catholic Church, still reference the Deuterocanonical writings. They still reference the Apocrypha, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. Again, we saw on the Apocrypha how it was voted out, right? We saw that it was voted out. The thing about it is this. The thing about it is this, right? The goal is to find out who wrote the Bible, what order the Bible was written, and what all comprises the Bible, right? Let's read the rest of this. The New Testament, NT, is the second division of the Christian biblical canon. It discusses the teachings and person of Jesus, as well as events in first century Christianity, the New Testament's background. The first division of the Christian Bible is called the Old Testament, which is primarily based upon the Hebrew Bible. Together, they are regarded as the sacred scripture by Christians, right? The New Testament is a collection of Christian texts originally written in Koine Greek. I told y'all to remember that when we was looking at the Old Testament, right? Remember that. At different times by various authors, while the Old Testament canon varies somewhat between different Christian denominations, the 27th book of the New Testament has been almost universally recognized within Christianity since at least last antiquity. Thus, in almost Christian traditions today, the New Testament consists of 27 books, the 4 canonical Gospels, the Acts of the Apostles, the Pauline epistles, Paul's epistles, the epistles to the Hebrews, general epistles, and the book of Revelation. The earliest known complete list of the 27 books is found in a letter written by Athanasius, a 4th century bishop of Alexandria, a Greek, dated to 367 AD. The 27-book New Testament was first formally canonized during the councils of Hippo and Carthage in North Africa. Listen to this. Pope Innocent I ratified the same canon in 405, but it is probable that a council in Rome in 382 under Pope Damasus I gave the same list first. The councils also provided the canon of the Old Testament, which included the Deuterocanonical books, the Apocrypha. Again, this is all that Catholic. This goes these Catholic folks. The mother of the harem. They still look at the Deuterocanonical books. They still look at the Apocrypha. Yet they voted for the very middle of the Bible to be taken away. Right? Let's go down. Let's go down. I gotta get this is where the phrase New Testament, that's why, remember I told y'all they weren't always called the Old Testament and the New Testament. These were called these by men, Christians. Christians, remember that. Let me keep going down. Because it starts saying about the different books. Now, here you see exactly what they said. Every denomination pretty much covers them, right? Pretty much accepts them, right? Let's look at the order of the books. The order in which the books of the New Testament appear differs between some collections and ecclesiastical traditions. This is why these heathens, they be so off. Even in the arrangement of the Bible, they are off. Right? The order in which the books of the New Testament appear differs between some collection of the ecclesiastical traditions. In the Latin West, prior to the Vulgate, early 5th century. So you're starting to see time has progressed. We were talking about 6, 4, 5, 3, BC till now we in AD, where the Apocrypha was written, but further along in AD, that's when the New Testament was written, right? And I'm trying to get to the part dating the New Testament. Here we go. The earliest manuscripts of the New Testament books date from the late second, which is after AD, which in the succession of time, you got the Old Testament, which was definitely BC. Some of the Apocrypha was BC, and some of it was AD. Then you got the New Testament, AD. It's that simple. That's the proper chronological writings of the Bible, properly put, right? Even the world says this. They corroborate this, right? The world even corroborated taking the very middle of it out. They voted for the Apocrypha to be out. Yet they still referenced it as the deuterocanonical writings, right? Let's go and see, right? Because we saw about the Septuagint, right? Because I definitely want to prove that even though all those time periods happen, we've proven somewhat that it was written in Hebrew. I want to prove it fully that all three parts were written in Hebrew by Israelites. It was parts that were later transliterated into Greek, and that all of it since then have been transliterated into English. But who ultimately wrote the Old Testament, the Apocrypha, and the New Testament, as it was all written in Hebrew? Israelites. But I got to prove it. So let's look at the Septuagint. Let's look at the Septuagint. Let's look at this. Because this was referenced, right? I will tell you there are two other things that we're going to look at that help that complete what all the Bible was transliterated from. We're going to look at the language that those documents and books were written in, and we're going to see who wrote the Bible. Because we already know the chronologically how the Bible was written now. But I'm still proving who wrote those things in that chronological order. Right? The Septuagint sometimes refers to as the Greek Old Testament or the translation of the 70. The transliteration of the 70, often abbreviated as LXS, is the earliest extant Greek translation of the Bible. It was transliterated into Greek from Hebrew. Those were Israelites, and none of them are white. So no white man wrote any part of the Bible. And I'm going to continue to prove that. The full Greek type derives from the story recorded in the letter of Aristeas to Philocrates that the laws of the Jews, Israelites, wrote and spoke Hebrew, were translated into the Greek language at the request of Ptolemy II, Philadelphus. This was before Christ. So this was it started all the way. All the way then, the transliterations from the Hebrew. By 72, look at who actually transliterated it. 72 Hebrew translators. 6 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. This is the world telling you, Israel. Who wrote the fucking Bible? This is the world telling people of Israelite descent. Who wrote the Bible? This is the world telling the world who wrote the Bible. It does not get any more simple than this. However, I know I'm dealing with my people. I'm dealing with Israel, and Israel can complicate simplicity, right? They can do this. I know I'm of Israel at one point in time. I used to do that. I said we're going to look at other writings that completed the full body of work that you know as the Bible, which the Bible, the Holy Bible, actually comprises of what you know as the Old Testament, then what you know as the Apocrypha, then what you know as the New Testament. Let me prove it. I gotta get all the texts that were transliterated, and we're going to see who wrote these texts and what they were transliterated from. The Dead Sea Scroll, also called the Qumran Cave Scrolls, are a set of ancient Jewish manuscripts from the Second Temple period. They were discovered over a period of 10 years between 1946 and 1956 at the Qumran Caves near Ein Faish in the West Bank on the northern shore of the Dead Sea, dating from the 3rd century BCE to the 1st century CE. The Dead Sea Scrolls are considered to be a keystone in the history of archaeology with great historical, religious, and linguistic significance because they include the oldest surviving manuscripts of entire books later included in the biblical canons, along with the extra biblical and deuterocanonical manuscripts. That preserve evidence of the diversity of religious thought in the late Second Temple Judaism. At the same time, they cast new light on the emergence of Christianity. When did Christianity come about? Well, Yahweh Shah ushered in the New Testament. Guess what? Guess when Christianity came? Because that was along the time of Rome and Greece, the Roman Catholic Church, Christianity. Almost all of the 15,000 scrolls and scroll fragments are held in the shrine of the book at the Israel Museum. located in the city of Jerusalem. I want to stop. I want y'all to look to the right of the screen, right over here. Right? You see the Great Psalm Scrolls, one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? One of the 981 texts of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The material is on parchment, a papyrus, and copper. Writing mostly Hebrew. But also Aramaic and Greek, because they transliterated some of them. The period of time from the 3rd BC to the 1st, it included the Apocrypha and the New Testament. As we saw, the Septuagint had the Old Testament and the Torah and all that in it. Let's go to this right here, because this is something that a lot of people don't know about. A lot of my people don't know about, because I said, I want to look at all the things that made up the complete body of work that is known as the whole Holy Bible, which includes in its chronological order the Old Testament, the Apocrypha, and the New Testament. Let's read about these. The Samaritan Pentateuch. I told y'all to remember Pentateuch when we read it a long time ago, back when we was looking at the Old Testament. The Samaritan Torah, Samaritan Hebrew, commonly called the Samaritan Pentateuch, is the text of the Torah written in the Samaritan script and used as sacred scripture by the Samaritans. It dates back to one of the ancient versions of the Hebrew Bible. Who wrote the Bible? Because what I just presented to you is everything that was used collectively, everything that was transliterated into the Bible. Who wrote the Bible? It was all written in Hebrew. It was all transliterated later, some to Greek, but all from Hebrew, and then from Greek to English. The Old Testament was transliterated straight from Hebrew to English. But I'm going to prove it even further. That existed during the Second Temple period and constitutes the entire biblical canon in Samaritanism. Some 6,000 differences exist between the Samaritan and the Jewish Masoretic text. The most are minor variations in the spelling of words or grammatical constructions, but others involve significant Semitic changes, such as the uniquely Samaritan commandment to construct an altar on Mount Gerizim. That was not. See, that's what I'm saying. It's when man started messing with it, but who ultimately wrote the Bible? Right? Look at this. When the Western world finally knew of the last of these writings, it first became known to the Western world in 1631. Samaritans believe that God authored their Pentateuch and gave Moses the first copy along with the 2 tablets containing the 10 Commandments. I am telling you, Israel, all of these things. Hold on, there's a part. All of these things were used to transliterate the Bible, but they were all wrote in Hebrew. The Samaritan Torah contains frequent agreements with the Septuagint because it's the same. The two Bible translations to which Catholics have traditionally ascribed as considerable authority. That is why I'm saying to you, I'm gonna stop sharing this real quick. The Catholic Church continues to accept the Apocrypha. They just call it the Deuterocanonical writings, right? Because when it was voted out under the name of Apocrypha, lost books. The books voted out. Everything in the Old Testament, the Apocrypha, and the New Testament was originally transliterated from the Hebrew, written by Israelites. That's what the world said. It's not written by any white man. It's white people as you all know them today. What they actually are, they are of one of the 18 biblical nationalities. They are known biblically not as Israelites, but as Edomites, Esau, Idumea. Not Israel or Israelites or Hebrews. As it was written in Hebrew, not in Idumaic, not in Edomaic. It was written in Hebrew by Israelites. The entire Bible was originally written in Hebrew and transliterated, letter for letter, word for word, to English. Some was transliterated to Greek and then transliterated to English. But in the end, who ultimately wrote all of it? Israelites, Hebrews. Okay, now we're going to go to the Bible. I want to start by going to Leviticus. I want to start by going to Leviticus 23. Very, very, very. Now, Leviticus, part of the Torah in the Old Testament, which was written just prior to the Apocrypha, which was written prior to the New Testament. Watch the Bible prove this. Leviticus 23, right? We're going to drop all the way down, right? We're going to look at the last feast day that's mentioned in the Old Testament, right? The last one mentioned starts at verse 39. Also, in the 15th day of the 7th month, remember, 7th month, when ye have gathered in the fruit of the land, ye shall keep a feast unto the Lord. 7 days of the first day shall be a Sabbath, and of the 8th day shall be a Sabbath. You know what this is, Israel? What feast day is this? I'm asking. I want to see who studied. And ye shall take you on the first day of the boughs of godly trees, branches of palm trees, and the boughs of fig trees and willows of the brook, and ye shall rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days. Again, this feast takes place. It starts on the eve of the 15th day of the 7th month, right? Keep that in mind. Ye shall dwell in booths 7 days. All that are Israelites born shall dwell in booths. What feast is this? That your generation shall know that I made the children of Israel to dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And Moses declared unto the children of Israel the feast of the Lord. Now, those were all the high holy days and feast days. That was the last of the high holy days and feast days that were in the Old Testament, right? Right? So to prove that the Apocrypha was written right after it, I want to go to 1 Maccabees chapter 4. 1 Maccabees in the Apocrypha, 1 Maccabees chapter 4. Let me see how I want to do this. I'm not going to go straight to the point. I'm going to start out around the point. I'm going to start. Let me look at it. Let me look at it first. I'm going to start at verse 41. This is a good place to start. Then Judas appointed certain men to fight against those that were in the fortress until he had cleansed the sanctuary. So he chose priests of blameless conversation, such as had pleasure in the law. Right? This reference back to the Old Testament and keeping the law. These were righteous men that he picked. They followed the law. This is proven that it's running right behind the Old Testament. Let's keep going. Who cleansed the sanctuary and bear out the defiled stones into an unclean place. And when, as they consulted what to do with the altar of burnt offerings, which was profane, they thought it best to pull it down, lest it should be a reproach to them, because the heathen had defiled it. Wherefore they pulled it down and laid up the stones in the mountains of the temple in a convenient place until there should come a prophet to shew what should be done with them. So there's a prophet that's to come. He comes in the New Testament. He ushers in the New Testament. But this was written prior to the New Testament. And I still have to prove that it was written after the Old Testament. That's what I'm in the act of doing now. Again, remember in Leviticus, the last feast day we read about was on the eve of the 15th day of the 7th month. Let's keep reading. Then they took whole stones according to the law and built a new altar according to the former, and made up the sanctuary and the things that were within the temple, and hollowed the courts. They made also new holy vessels, and into the temple they brought the candlestick, the menorah. Oh, we finna read about another feast day that was not mentioned in the Old Testament. Is mentioned in the next writing, the next portion of the Bible, which is the Apocrypha. Let's keep reading, because I'm starting to get ahead of myself. I'm telling the story without letting the Bible tell the story. and the altar of burnt offerings and of incense and the table. And upon the altar they burned incense and lamps that were upon the candlestick they lighted, that they might give light in the temple. Furthermore, they set the loaves upon the table and spread out the veils and finished all the works which they had begun to make. Now on the 25th day of the 9th month, wait a minute. This is given a direct part of the Hebrew calendar. This is saying on the 5th and 20th day of the 9th month, which is after the 7th month, which is where Leviticus left off. Which is called Caslu. In the 148th year, they rose up. This is in 140 BC. Because remember, back up here, it said there's a prophet. They laid the stones in verse 46. They laid the stones in the mountain on the temple in a convenient place until there should come a prophet. There's a prophet that's going to be born. He coming straight out of Judea. I'm giving all the clues I can, just like the Apocrypha was saying the same thing. This prophecy of this prophet to come out of Judea, that was in the Old Testament too. You can read about the prophecy of Yahushua even in the Old Testament. But let me keep going. Because we didn't get on down here, right? And it says, in the 148th year, they rose up bedtimes in the morning and offered sacrifice according to the law upon the new altar of burnt offerings which they had made. Look at what time and what day the heathen had profaned it. Even in that was it dedicated, the feast of dedication. So you don't read about the Feast of Dedication in the Old Testament. You don't read about what's known as Hanukkah or the Feast of Dedication in the Old Testament. You don't read about the Feast of Dedication until the Apocrypha, right? But there's more proof. Hold on. The Bible proves it even more. So hold 1 second. Let me finish this. It was dedicated with songs and chithims and harps and cymbals. Then all the people fell upon their face, worshiping and praising the God of heaven who had given them good success. And so they kept the dedication of the altar 8 days, the Feast of Dedication, and offered burnt offerings and with gladness, and sacrificed the sacrifice of deliverance and praise. They decked also the forefront of the temple with crowns of gold and with shields, and the gates and the chambers they renewed. They hanged doors upon them. Thus were there very great gladness among the people, for that the reproach of the heathen had been put away. Moreover, Judas and his brethren, with the whole congregation of Israel, ordained that the days of the dedication of the altar should be kept in their season from year to year by the space of 8 days, from the 25th day of the month of Caslu, with mirth and gladness. This is where you find out about the Feast of Dedications in the Apocrypha, which was written after the Old Testament. And I'm going to prove it because the Feast of Dedication was kept in the New Testament in that season. But how did they know to keep it in the New Testament? Because the Apocrypha was written before the Old Testament, and the Apocrypha was written after the Old Testament, yet the Feast of Dedication was never mentioned in the Old Testament. When man voted to take the Apocrypha out, that made no sense, because when we go to John, we're going to see that they kept the Feast of Dedications, but then people will say, well, this is not mentioned in Leviticus 23, where it's talking about all the high holy days and feast days. The reason why is because man took out the middle of the story. The very middle of the story where you read about this feast, because you can't read about this feast in the Old Testament. It doesn't come about until the Apocrypha, which was written after the Old Testament and prior to the New Testament, because that's how they knew to keep it in the New Testament. All written by Hebrew. All written in Hebrew by Israelites. Let me keep going. At that time, also they builded up the Mount Sion with high walls and strong towers round about, lest the Gentiles should come and tread it down as they had done before. And they set there a garrison to keep it, and fortified Bethsura to preserve it, that the people might have a defense against Idumea, the white man that my people ignorantly think wrote this Bible. Let's go now to Second Maccabees. Second Maccabees, still the Apocrypha, still after the Old Testament, but still prior to the New Testament. Let's see. Second Maccabees. Second Maccabees, chapter 10, and we only going to give verses 1 through 6. Now Maccabeus and his company, the Lord guiding them, the Most High guiding them, only one people guiding them, the same people that wrote this whole Bible, guiding them, recovered the temple and the city. But the altars which the heathen had built in the open street, and also the chapels, they pulled down. And having cleansed the temple, they made another altar, and striking stones, they took fire out of them and offered a sacrifice after 2 years, and set forth incense and lights and shewbread. When that was done, they fell flat and besought the Lord that they might come no more into such troubles, but if they sinned any more against him, that he himself would chasten them with mercy, and they might not be delivered unto the blasphemous and barbarous nations, all the heathens, in all of the other 17 biblical nationalities, except the one. Now, upon the same day that the strangers profaned the temple, on the very same day it was cleansed again, even the 25th day of the same month, which is Caslu, the 9th month. And they kept the 8 days with gladness, as in the Feast of just like they had previously kept the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, the end of Leviticus 23, what feast is that? Just like they kept the Feast of Tabernacles, that's how they keep the Feast of Dedication, where the first day is like a Sabbath with no servile work done in unto it. Remembering that not long before they held the Feast of the Tabernacles, when as they wandered in the mountains and dens like beasts. They held at this point in time when the Apocrypha was written. This is recording when Israel, 2 months prior to holding the Feast of Dedication, which this is talking about, they held the Feast of Tabernacles. which they knew to hold the Feast of Tabernacle because it was written in the Old Testament, right? They knew to hold the Feast of Dedication because just a whole book before Second Maccabees and First Maccabees. That's what this is referencing to. First Maccabees, chapter 4. Actually, you can start at verse 1 and read all the way down. Right? That's what Second Maccabees, chapter 10, verse 1 through 6 is referencing to. Right? So at this point in time, they knew about the Old Testament. That's why they kept the Feast of Tabernacles. Now we're going to go to further on down the line in the New Testament, right? Of course, they knew to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. It was written in the Old Testament. But now let's go to John chapter 10. Let's go to John chapter 10. New Testament, John chapter 10. This is going to prove that the Apocrypha was written before the New Testament, because in the Old Testament, you don't see about the Feast of Dedications. You don't see it because it's not written about yet in the Old Testament. It doesn't get written about until the Apocrypha, which was written before the New Testament, which we're in now. And we're going to see something. We're going to see the apostles kept the Feast of Tabernacles, the year of this. But they also kept the Feast of Dedications. But how would they know if it wasn't written prior to the day of their walking? See, Yahweh Shah ushered in the New Testament. That's when the apostles were walking. So prior to all of that, the Feast of Dedication had to have been recorded as a feast day, proving that the Apocrypha was written. Even by the Bible, the Apocrypha was written before the New Testament. But let's make sure. We're going to get chapter 10. We're just going to do verses 1 through 22. Look who's speaking, the same one that ushered in the New Testament. Right? Just like I said, and in the chronological order, you're about to see the Old Testament was written. Then the Apocrypha was written. Then Yahweh ushered in the New Testament, which was written. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that entereth not by the door into the sheepfold, but climbeth up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. He's literally in a dialogue right now. But he that entereth in by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the porter openeth, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calleth his own sheep by name, and leadeth them out. And when he putteth forth his own sheep, he goeth before them, and the sheep will follow him, for they know his voice. Queen Paula Ma, you love it. You love hearing that. I know it because you say it a lot. The sheep know his voice. They know the shepherd's voice. Let me keep reading. And the stranger will not follow, but will flee from him, for they know not the voice of strangers. This parable spake Jesus unto them, but they understood not what things they were which he spake unto them. Then Jesus said unto them again, verily, verily, I say unto you, I am the door of the sheep. He giving them a whole different, I'll take a different angle. All that ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved and shall go in and out and find pasture. He's talking to the lost sheep of Israel, the only people he came for. He's even saying the strangers, they won't even hear. They won't even know what this is about. The thief cometh not, but for to steal and kill and destroy. I am come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. Same lost sheep of the house of Israel, the people who wrote this Bible. Israelites. As it was all, the whole Bible was written in Hebrew. But let me keep going. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. But he that is a hireling and not the shepherd, whose own sheep are not, seeth the wolf coming, and leaveth the sheep, and fleeth. And the wolf catcheth them and scattereth the sheep. The hireling fleeth, because he is an hireling, and careth not for the sheep. Why did they take the Apocrypha out? They care not for the sheep. They are heathens. The more I'm reading this, I'm just thinking, boy, they tried to. The lost sheep, they tried. They voted it out. The whole middle of the Bible. Let me keep going. As the Father knoweth me, even so know I the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep, for Israel. The same people that wrote and spake Hebrew, who wrote the Bible. No man taketh it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down. I have power to take it again. He's saying, I'm going to die. I have the power to die, but I will resurrect. This commandment have I received. The Most High gave that direct commandment to Yahweh Shai. Let's keep reading. There was a division, therefore, again among the Jews for these sayings. And many of them said, he hath a devil and is mad. Why hear ye him? Others said, these are not the words of him that hath the devil. Can a devil open the eyes of the blind? Listen carefully, Israel. And it was at Jerusalem, the feast of dedication, and it was winter. They knew in the New Testament to hold the feast of dedication, which was only mentioned in the Apocrypha, even to the season to keep it, which is the 5th and 20th day of the 9th month. It is wintertime. It is the winter season. Even the Bible proves that the Old Testament was written, and then the Apocrypha was written, and then the New Testament was written. The world proved to you, Israel, the world proved to the world who wrote the whole Bible, as it was all written in Hebrew, some transliterated into Greek, all of it transliterated for here in the Western Hemisphere, all transliterated into English. This is for anyone who ever thought, felt, believed, or it was their opinion of anything different. All that subjective shit don't matter, because the truth of the matter is this. And let me stop sharing my screen. I'm not even sharing my screen. I done read all it and didn't even share my screen. I apologize, Israel. I'm saying all of that to say this. There is no lie in this. This book is only for Israel. There is no lie in this. This book was written only by Israel. The truth of the matter is this. The Old Testament was written in Hebrew by the Israelites, then the Apocrypha, and in this order, then the Apocrypha was written in Hebrew by Israelites, then the New Testament was written in Hebrew by Israelites. Parts of the Apocrypha and parts of the New Testament, or pretty much all of the New Testament, was then transliterated into Greek. The whole entire Bible for you that live over here in the Western Hemisphere was then transliterated into English. But who wrote the whole Bible? The whole Bible was wrote in Hebrew by Israelites. That is the truth of the matter. Now, this was something I was going to do for the second royal gathering, but I knew it was going to take a little time to do this, right? So I said I was still going to do a truth or thought about. If there is anyone that still has an opinion or still feels or still believes or still thinks any differently, please feel free to leave a comment. And I will help to edify you even more so. With that, Israel, I ask that you keep in prayer everybody that was on the prayer list. Keep your beloved brethren in prayer. Keep your beloved nation, the ones that are in righteousness. Keep them in prayer. Till next time, Israel. It's your beloved brother, King Marcus. I love you all. Till next time, be it the Most High's will, I bid you Shabbat Shalom.